But should I start with the significations of the sun generally? And then we'll cover as many houses as we can, and we'll go sequentially. So from first house to the 12th house. Yeah.
It's the original Atma Karka, right?
Yes. It's not the karka, it is the atma. It's the
Atma. Yeah,
soul.
yeah,
It
yeah.
literally is the soul. That is the key signification of the sun, the soul, which is a very complex concept to talk about, but we'll try. Sun also represents consciousness. So after soul, if we were to go down, it represents soul, consciousness, self, identity, self-concept, ego. And then the sun also, we can go to another category, which starts to represent vitality, health, and then we have light, daytime, visibility, clarity, vision, fame, because it's starting to light things up. And then we get another set of significations with the sun, which has to do with authority, leadership, government, governance. It also has to do with our career, because this is where we also come to shine, and we're also kind of in charge within the public, the visible sphere of life. And then the sun also represents stability and reliability. And what we have to remember about the sun in terms of some kind of a visual, the sun is a center and everything around it. It's literally like the sun in our solar system, the way that it's at the center of our solar system. And because of its gravity and because of its central position, everything in its periphery will orbit around there. So the sun, when we see it in a chart, is talking about that kind of a dynamic. There's a centrality to it. It's the center of being. And when we talk about the soul, the Atma, we're talking about that which is essentially the self within the center of everything that we are. There's a soul concept. And our identity is orbiting around it, how we're visible is orbiting around it, how we behave orbits around that. So these are the things that sun comes to symbolize.
Okay, and I guess the father as well.
Yes, the father, it's yeah, the father, back in the day, you would call him the patriarch, the leader of the family. Yeah. And it's a masculine planet, and masculine planets, what that means is that they're decisive, they're initiative, they're action oriented, they're outward moving, whereas feminine principle are considered to be receptive, inward moving, internal, such as the moon, which is the other luminary. Sun has these kinds of qualities.
And
Uh,
it's slightly malefic, or so it is malefic.
Okay, so sun in itself is sattvic. So it's balanced, it's preserving, it's maintaining. Like even when we think about the sun relative to Earth, it's generative. It has a lot of positive qualities. However, when we take the month of August, let's say, into consideration, everything in nature gets burnt out because of its heat. And because of that hotness, that power, that overpowering aspect of the sun that's unparalleled, sun becomes a mild malefic. So in that sense, when sun goes into certain houses, sits with certain planets and certain signs, because of that heat and that overwhelming power that's associated to it, it can start to diminish or burn out the significations of those other factors in the chart. So in that sense, the sun is considered a mild malefic, but the sun in itself is not malefic, is not intending to cause harm like Mars and Saturn, because those two planets are actually cruel and harsh. They have an objective for harshness and being harmful, but the sun doesn't have that. But when you get too close to certain aspect of the sun, like the heat and the light can be blinding, then it becomes a mild malefic.
Okay, but otherwise, yeah. I mean, it's leaders and all that, so it can't be that. I
No.
guess it could behave malefically, but
Yeah. Yeah. And as we'll see, a dysfunctional sun, when the sun is dysfunctional in certain houses, it brings out the side of it with certain conjunction and aspects and certain signs. When you look at the whole dynamic of the chart, you can get someone who's very, actually thumbs down to these ones, very arrogant, egotistical,
oh
pompous.
yeah, that's right, the ego.
Yes, pompous, narcissist, bombastic, overwhelming, someone who has a very weak self-concept, so their sense of confidence is diminished. And so a lot of times people think if you got someone whose sense of confidence is diminished, they're going to be like introverted and shy, but people actually become manipulative. So that aspect of the sun that has to do with truth because it illuminates and makes things visible, these individuals can start to become a little bit shady. So because of those very qualities of the sun, they can start to cast shade on things and bend the truth and become manipulative. So yeah, when the sun's dysfunctional, we can get some funky dispositions, personalities, characteristics, and ways of behaviors out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know we're kind of doing the houses, but just because we're talking about Leo,
Yeah.
does it do well in its own sign?
Whenever we get sun and we'll see sun in the first house, as a raw definition, we can't give it a negative slant because this is where sun is prominent and positive. And same with Leo, as a raw interpretation, we can't give the sun a negative slant. However, that sun is making aspects, it has conjunctions, it could be in a house that is struggling. So it's getting its negative slant from those kinds of dynamics. But sun, it's in its own sign, so it's at the seat of its own power. Like everything that the sun needs, Leo is, if the sun is the king, Leo is the kingdom. So it's providing it everything that it needs to be at its full power. So we can't give the sun a negative slant in Leo, but yes, it's in its own sign. So it's dignified, it's
But is it
powerful.
also more intense? Yeah, I was going to say, does it not make it more intense?
It makes it intense in a way that it wants to, like all the significations of the sun that I just listed, it wants to play all of those things out. But once when it starts to get certain aspects from certain planets, or if it's conjunct, then it's gonna actually struggle a lot. Like you would think that a Sun in Leo person should have a sense of leadership and should have this decisiveness, be very stable, have no problem with putting themselves out there, being seen, being the center. I've met a lot of Sun in Leo people who struggle tremendously with these aspects of life. That's usually when you look at their chart, it's like, oh, there's Saturn. Oh, there's the moon like sitting over there, making it, bringing that introversion to it. There's Ketu, there's Rahu. So yeah, then you start to see that even Sun in Leo, raw interpretation, good, but when the whole dynamic of the chart, the sun is beginning to struggle. Yeah.
Okay. But the sun's position, I know it's not just the father, but you could tell a
No.
lot about the person's father from how it's positioned.
Yeah, it does say something about the father or the person themselves as a father.
Okay.
But a lot of times when you look at someone's chart, you have to also take into consideration a lot of different components of the chart to understand what their father dynamic was. Just the sun by itself, because the
Hmm.
sun's primary key symbol is not father, and the moon's primary key symbol is not the mother. And this is what shocks me when I watch astrologers. These are the two things that they linger on when they talk about these two planets. The sun is key symbol is your soul. Second is your consciousness. So is your awareness, is how you are a conscious agent or an entity. That means how you're perceiving and experiencing that relation of being a subject, having the experience of objects of the world, and then your sense of self. You know, father is almost like halfway to the bottom of the list. So when you want to figure out how the sun is functioning in someone's chart, you're going to have to do a little bit of chart searching and investigation and put all the pieces of the puzzle together. But yeah, it always surprises me how astrologers linger to the moon and the sun as mother and the father. And I almost feel like people have been brainwashed. As
Well,
soon
yeah,
as
that's
they
what
hear
most people
sun
assume.
and moon, they just hear mother and father.
Yeah.
Even with the moon, the primary is the mind, subjectivity, emotions. Mother is coming like, because there's a branch, there's a root of this tree, and then it branches out to different things. So if you make mother and father the primary symbol, and you know, I think to some degree, this thing of making the son the father, it's a Western influence anyway, because in the West, within Christianity, the father and the son, they're actually
Oh,
referring, it's coming from this concept. So it shouldn't, when people take it to be the primary symbolism of the sun, it's actually stemming from this religious tradition rather than the symbolic tradition of astrology, whether we want to take it back to India, Babylonian, Persian. The soul, the word is being exchanged for the father, which is God. and the Holy Spirit.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
But
I can see
yeah,
that.
but it's like incredible to me. Like every time you watch someone or someone's talking about the sun and the moon is like father and mother.
Yeah, normally that's how it's
Yeah.
always portrayed.
Yeah.
So a
And
lot of people will look at their chart and be like, "Oh my God, that's like my daddy issues or my mommy issues."
your daddy issues and mommy issues could come from the sun and the moon, but you have to look at the chart quite extensively. But the sun is so important in understanding not only who you are, because the who of you is your identity, and that is represented by the sun, but the sun is saying what you are made of, that core essence that is you. That's what it's talking about, your soul. And the configuration of that soul being expressed as a self now has a particular kind of consciousness. So it's saying you as an existing entity, how are you experiencing this life? What is it that you have the capacity to understand? Things that you're able to see. The sun represents vision, it represents the light. So the kind of consciousness that you are permits you to see certain things in this life and to have certain experiences. So if you want to understand the entirety of your life's experience, the sun is one of the most important planets to look at, because who's doing all the experiencing? The self is. And because the self has a consciousness, is it has those experiences. So when like people come for life narrative counseling with me, we focus a lot on the sun because people want to know who they are, what my purpose is, why am I here, why do I exist? This is the Atma, this is the soul
Oh,
existing in its manifest form. Sorry.
so sorry, I had to cut you off because I know we shouldn't get off top, but it is kind of on topic. But that's interesting. So basically, if you have a person who wants to understand, like we've had this discussion in many other videos, a lot of people go for the traditional, like when am I married, when am I gonna have kids, blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
there are a lot, especially I find nowadays, more and more people are wanting to understand who they are,
Yes.
why they're here, what their purpose is.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you're saying the focus is actually on the sun.
We start with the sun. Who are you? Who's experiencing everything that you're saying that you have experienced, everything that hurts, everything that your perception has picked up thus far is because of the kind of consciousness that you are, is because of the type of self and identity that has come with it. So yeah, we have to look at that, right? And you can't change your narrative if you can't understand it. And then you begin to understand it when you understand these components, which are all related to the sun. So the sun is very significant in a chart.
Okay. And this type of reading, is this a different like process or is it like a over time or
Yeah, this is the ones that I do with clients on an ongoing basis. It's just
okay.
people trying to figure out their life and themselves, and we use the chart as a blueprint. Of course, we look at every planet, but that question of who am I? What am I about? What's my purpose? Why am I here? We're talking about the sun.
And is everybody's experience like if somebody wants to book this, is it like multiple, obviously it's multiple sessions, but
Yeah.
is everybody kind of different? Like some people do 5 sessions, some people do 3 sessions. Like how does that work?
Yeah, it's up to the person how
Client.
long, how
Okay.
much exploring they want to do until they feel satisfied. And some people it's just ongoing. And then some people just have a very specific thing in life that they're really trying to understand. Because a lot of times, the reasons why we hurt is because something happens in life in terms of our experiences. And we know this with experience. Whatever that happens, even if it hurts, even if it feels traumatizing in the moment of its happening, with time, when we get distance from it, relative to the rest of our story, somehow this event starts to have its place and it fits in like a piece of puzzle. And then that hurts and that feeling of being traumatized start to subside over time. Sometimes this could take 6 months, sometimes this takes 6 years, sometimes this takes decades. But by doing this is to having the ability to create the right amount of distance and closeness to understand the context. And for some people, this clicks in very fast. And for other people, they just want to keep exploring. Like, okay, what about that? What about that? So it just becomes ongoing, you know? But the sun
Okay.
is super important in the chart. And it's unfortunate because the entertainment of astrology, like looking at your sun signs and reading the little predictions on the back of
Hmm.
paper because of your sun sign, it has diminished the significance of how important the sun is. And the chart. So it's almost become like a form of entertainment, like, oh, I'm a Sun Taurus. Oh, you're that type of a person. It's just very like the stereotype, but it's saying so much.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's actually really interesting because most people don't think of it that way, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't realize how much. But like I've said, I think I've said it many times in other videos that I find a lot of people I speak to nowadays, they're so much more interested about who they are,
Yeah.
why they're here, what's their purpose.
Why have I experienced the things that I have, and why does
Yeah,
it feel this way?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we all have pain, we all have trauma of some sort, but most people are like, oh, the sun, my father, my
Yeah.
daddy issues. I have, whatever placement there, Saturn or something, and that explains my daddy issues. Or, okay, so the sun is like a major, like when you're looking for that type of reading, that is the initial focus.
Yeah, that is very important. When people meet someone, for example, and
Mhm.
they're so curious, especially if they know astrology, right away they want to go to the person's like Venus to see what they're like or their seventh house. No, you want to know what he or she, what they are like. What you need to do is to understand their sun. That's who they are. You can meditate on someone's chart for about 3 months. You'll have a very good idea about what their makeup, their configuration, their sense of self, their self-concept, how they behave. All of it, a lot of it will come from the sun. Sun is super important.
Sorry, I got really excited there. I was like, so in the first house, it must be really intense, no?
Mm.
Because it's yourself, it's you, your boss, everything.
Hmm. Yeah, in the first house, not only like the way you mentioned, for example, the resonance and the synergy between the sun and the first house are insane. First house represents the self. The sun represents the self. First house
Yeah.
represents your health. The sun represents your health. This is where you ascend and manifest into being in the first house. The sun, that generative power, that which makes one visible. So it creates a lot of connections between the first house and the sun. And we have to take something else into consideration too here. Talking about house systems and different ways of looking at things, the sun, once when it arrives to the first house, it has complete strength, even more so than being in its own house, a lot more than being in its own house. Even if we put the natural zodiac here, Aries, sun's exalted. In the first house, sun is prominent and positive. By the time we start moving from the first house to the second house, third house, fourth house, sun's actually traversing through, it's starting to lose its strength because the first house is the eastern horizon where the sun ascends and comes to commence a new day starts. So it's starting to lose its power. And by the time we get to the seventh house, the sun has lost its directional strength completely. The sun is dying. The sun is setting. The sun has no more power. It's becoming darkness. In the eighth house, it's starting to regenerate itself. In the ninth house, is getting directional strength. In the 10th house, is right above your head. But by the time it gets to the first house, it is at its most powerful. And it's not hard to imagine that because the first house represents the eastern horizon of where you are, the east where the sun rises, that's the first house. So the sun is ascending to life. And when we think about soul and self, we even if we close our eyes and our imagine, we can imagine it even symbolically in our mind as a kind of an ascension. So in the first house, we're ascending to life. We're ascending into our body because the first house represents the body. We are becoming ourself. We are becoming that configuration that we are. We are getting vitality, energy, which the first house is about health. We're becoming something tangible and getting the power to do and to initiate things in this world. And I was saying earlier, the sun is a masculine planet. It initiates, it starts things, it moves things, it activates things. So in the first house, the person's activated and they're empowered to start acting in the world. So the sun in the first house is very powerful. And the first house is where others also see us, and the sun is bright. The sun is what makes things visible. So this individual in general is going to be someone who's recognized. They walk into a room and it's like, whoa, they won't be missed. They're noticed, they're known, because the sun brings this kind of quality in the first house. And then we can start to give it, these are all raw interpretation. If you have sun in the first house, you could have many, many struggles because there's the rest of the chart. But just as raw interpretation, when we talk about, let's say, clarity, this is a person with a clear mind, they're decisive, they have confidence, they have this sense of leadership. People look at them and they're like, I want to follow that guy. I believe what he says. I like how he expresses himself, how he articulates himself. I understand him or her. I want to follow. That's the leader. So sun in the first house comes to be very prominent and positive. As I was saying with the other planets that we've covered so far too, every planet in the first house becomes prominent. And in some ways, even Saturn will get a positive slant in the first house. But other planets will bring certain kind of hardships with them when they're in the first house. Whereas other planets like the sun, it's hard to put a negative slant to the sun in the first house unless there are glitchy aspects of the chart that are interacting with the sun.
Is there a lot of arrogance with sun in the first house?
See, that's what I'm saying. Like, we can't give it a negative slant and it's raw interpretation.
Okay.
But if it's getting, let's say, a gaze from Saturn, for example, it could lose its self-confidence in some ways and start to overcompensate with being like, it won't like being challenged. So it becomes like a authoritative person instead of, because a good leader, first and foremost, they have very good listening skills, they have good observational skills, they actually do what they expect of other people to do. So you can get a bit of like a person because they lack the confidence and they know or they don't know that they could do it. They try to create this persona of this is who I am, this is what I do, and they become, and then they try to tell people and override other people to tell them what to do, for example. But like sun by itself in the first house, we can't really give it a negative slant. Like a sun Jupiter conjunct in the first house, you could start getting a very pompous person. Sure. Too much.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there are people who walk into a room and there's something very dignified and confident about them, and it's as if the spotlight goes on them very naturally. And then there are certain people who walk into a room super loud, like, look at me, I'm the best, I have arrived. That's kind of pompous and arrogant. So yeah, you can start to get certain dynamics in the chart where even sun in the first house starts to get strange feelings. But by itself, it's hard to give it a negative slant.
And they're good leaders.
Yeah, super good leaders. And the sun in its appearance is a kind of box looking in terms of like it's shorter. It's not like when you put a Saturn, you get elongated, slim person. You put Jupiter, you get a fuller body. And with the sun, you kind of have a stockier kind of a body, but healthy and full of vitality. And it's strong. It's a strong body.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, but you just get good health and vitality with the sun in the first house. And that's such an important thing to have in this life in terms of feeling activated, energized, having the initiative to want to move. All of these things are great attributes that the sun brings out in the first house.
And I'm guessing in the second house, it's basically going to be how the sun like expresses himself, or
Yeah, just one more thing about the sun in the first house. The first house is a dharmic house, and the sun is about light and clarity, which makes the sun synonymous with truth. And this dharmic aspect of the first house is to have personal integrity. So one of the things that sun brings into the first house when it's functional, prominent, positive, the person has great personal integrity. You're not going to find someone who's full of hypocrisy and just that comes with a lot of BS. You know, they have a very strong moral compass of who they are and what they ought to be doing in this life, and it's clear to them. And they make it clear to other people. Everyone knows where they stand and what they're about, and they don't stray from it. again, as raw interpretations.
Yeah.
Second house.
I guess because I thought like speech. So somebody with that would have a powerful speech, would they not?
But let's go through the primary significations of the second house. So the second house, we've discussed it in other videos, supports the first house signification. So it's essentially a house of support. This is how we come to get our support in life. That's why it comes to represent our families, because they provide us with support. It represents our fixed assets and wealth in general, because those things support us. Our true lifelong friends, because they also support us. It represents food and nutrition, because it also supports us. When all of these things are supported, we're healthy, and our health supports our being, which was starting to happen in the first house, right? And our mouth is the way we intake that food, and it's also how we can vocalize and make our needs known so that we can receive the support. So the second house comes to have these significations, and right away we can see that sun's going to have resonance in this house, because the sun represents health, energy, vitality, regeneration, that regenerative power that's there, and this house is doing that, and it represents health. The second house also represents practical knowledge about how to accumulate wealth. The sun here, with its sense of clarity, can make that known to someone. So someone knows, for example, how to invest and how to save and how to buy the right properties, what to eat, get in terms of being the support system of a family. Here the father figure comes into play, in a sense that in terms of family, if the sun is the masculine figure, we can see a person who has the capacity to create that support, because the sun represents leadership and governance. This is the house where some of those things are happening within the private, not the private sphere, but within the familial component of life. So sun comes to have resonance in the second house, and it's functional, but it's starting to lose a bit of its power, right? The sun was truly the sun in the first house. In the second house, let me put it this way. In the first house, the sun is acting the way that it is in the solar system. It's at the center and everything is orbiting around it. By the time it starts to come into the second house, it's starting to lose. We can start to see from here forward, the sun is starting to lose its central positioning. And by the time it gets to the seventh house, we're completely talking about the periphery and not the center anymore. So here, sun is still, it's like, I am the center because I am providing for my family. I am creating stability. I am that friend who shows up. Now you can see that you're starting to move away from the center. So it starts to create a little bit of a pull and push dynamic here, but in general, the sun does well. But the sun's starting to learn how to negotiate in the second house.
And from a financial standpoint, what does it mean? Like, because it's fixed assets, right?
Yeah, it's your wealth, right? Usually wealth is not like income that comes and goes. It's something that has that stability to it, that it stays. And the
Mhm.
sun is a stabilizing force. So that's what I'm saying. The sun here can give you the knowledge of how to build wealth, how to be reliable with money, for example, how to be reliable with these things. Like, you have the sun here, it's going to have the intent of building intergenerational wealth.
Okay.
It's trying to build its kingdom and trying to create very strong pillars of support for its family. It's taken on that leadership quality in that sense. So the sun here is apt at building wealth. The sun and Mercury both here can become legacy makers. And the sun, because of his strength, and Mercury is like pollinating stuff here, it's like creating the craziest investment portfolio that you have ever seen that will just grow in time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the sun is very apt at building wealth here, especially having the practical knowledge of knowing how to do it and being so stable and being so reliable. Yeah, it's able to do it.
So I guess a planet like Venus or the moon would kind of not, they'd be focused on spending more than.
Um, the moon is desirous. So the moon can be, and the moon's comfort seeking. So yeah, some money could go out in that sense, but they do bring great attributes in terms of Like the moon is about care and nurture, right? And this house is saying that this is a support house. So the moon can create that kind of a support system, but it does have some fluctuations in it when it comes to money and wealth. It's probably not the best management of money through the moon. Venus also has a desires aspect, not like the moon, but it has appreciation for beauty, so it could spend those things. But I also see Venus getting a Van Gogh painting, so it's not going to lose its value over time.
Oh, so investments, yeah.
Yeah, because Venus likes luxury and things with value. So I could see it also doing well in the second house. The planets I personally wouldn't give them right off the bat good slants or Mars and Saturn. Mars will cut you off from those support system, and Saturn just restricts and hinders it, which is not fun. You want support in life. And then eventually you want to get to a point, let's say you have your own family, you want to also have enough stability to now be the pillar and the support for your family. Those,
And when it comes to friends like family, which you can also, I guess, see in the second, with
yeah.
the sun there, is that like influential friends or
You yourself could be a very reliable friend, or you have friends who are also very reliable. But this house is not, even if you know like really well-to-do people or famous people, these are not, they're still very like just you and them type of thing. And they could be influential in terms of, let's say, economics, because this house is connecting itself to the economic aspect of life. So yeah, in that sense, they could be of great and tremendous help in building, helping you build your wealth. Also, are you doing it for them? It could indicate these kinds of things. The negative slant we could bring to the sun here when authority goes wrong. So I've built this wealth, it's mine. I'm supporting everyone. So it starts to get that notion of and that's very draining for people who are receiving the support. So it could give it that kind of a slant too. Like now let's go into that concept of the father, intergenerational wealth. A father who owns all the wealth and puts many, many conditions of how he will support his children, for example, and what they will get and what they need to do, how they need to support him before they can, how they need to support his business before they can get access to. So it can start to have these kinds of slants too. But in general, sun, good in the second house. Yeah. And then it's an Artha house. This is a wealth building house in general. And the bottom line of wealth is to create supports. And when we think about the sun in relation to the earth as a generative planet, so it's trying to generate that wealth. That would be the aim of the sun in this house, and to generate that kind of support.
and I guess when we're linking it to the third house.
So now we went from kind of taking the sun a little bit off center, but sun still has a periphery that's relying on it, which is, let's say, the family. We bring it to the third house. The sun is now all about itself. There is no periphery. Sun's like putting on blinders and it's like, me, what do I need? How do I have these ideas. How do I execute them in the world? What do I need to do? And I've said this with Saturn and Mars. The third house is an Upachaya house, is a bit of a difficult house because it doesn't give us things easily initially, but over time, it gets better with time and we get better. And with the third house, is very clear why it gets better because this is a house where we get our skill sets. This is a house of learning. This is a house of giving instructions and receiving instructions. This is a house of our communication skills. How do we speak? How do we talk? How do we write? And then it also has a house that has to do with our courage, determination, which are also required in terms of, well, how do you get the skill sets? You got to be determined. You got to have courage to start new endeavors. It's also a house that has to do with our competitors, our siblings, our competitors. And the sun, like Saturn and Mars, is not as malefic, but is a mild malefic. And it has this inceptive, decisive, reliable quality. So the sun also does well in the third house in these ways. So when the sun speaks, the sun has authority in what it's saying because this is a house of communication. The sun knows how to write that letter to get its point across as to why it needs to get these things or why these things should be done. The sun will reliably show up to practice every day to get better because the sun is like, pick any day of the year, any day of the year. Go back 100 years and look at that day. The sun has been rising at the same place and at the same time and setting at the same place and the same time. This is how reliable the sun is. It doesn't retrograde. It doesn't, nothing. It just has this very regular movement. So when it comes to this house, which also requires our discipline to gain skills and to cultivate what is required for us to learn, the sun is an excellent placement in the third house to do all of this. And when it comes to competitors, the sun will actually here be the captain, take the leadership. It's like, I'm not even going to dignify what you're saying because I'm the leader. You're not my competitor, you know? Yeah, the sun here, in general, just because of the qualities that it has and the qualities this house has. Like this house is ambitious, for example. There's a lot of ambition in this house. How do I make my desires and my feelings, my emotions tangible in the world? So the sun comes to help. But this is one of the houses where the sun could also take some of the negative slants if it's starting to have strange dynamics in the chart. You want to have good sportsmanship. If you're a leader, you want to be a true leader. You don't want to be just this weird, overwhelming, overpowering person. You know, even when you communicate, you have to know the art of communication. It's not necessary to speak with authority all the time. So sun here can start to emphasize its strength and power, which the sun already has. That's why it is a mild malefic. And if it's getting, like, let's say you have sun and Mars conjunct here, you get someone too competitive, too much in need of being the captain of the team. These kinds of things can become burdensome for the native and for people around them. Having a sibling like that who just constantly wants to win at any cost or any price is just, it's too, you also want to have your siblings are your competitors, but you also want to love them. You want to feel like you have some sort of a reciprocal relationship back with them and have fun with them. So yeah, the sun can be overwhelming, but this is an Upachaya house and it gets better with time. And this is also a Kama house. This is a house of enjoyment. And putting the slant of fun on sun can also be a little bit strange because sun is mature masculinity. So it always has a sense of purpose. It always knows its place. It always knows its objective. So that sense of play that can also come out of the third house can get a little, which brings some sense of enjoyment, will get hindered. But the sun will get its greatest karma or enjoyment in terms of its achievements and attainments and how it's able to take the things that it really wants and feels and is able to manifest them in the world. What is that saying where people talk about power of manifestation? What is that? Like
I think
I manifest my like what I
desires, yeah.
want.
Oh,
No,
like the secret.
yeah, there's a word that people use. I see it all the time. I manifest my feelings or my thoughts, something like that. I don't know. The malefics can do
I
this.
don't know exactly what you're talking about, but yeah.
The malefics are very apt at doing this in the third house, especially Sun and Mars.
So somebody who's able to will their desires almost.
Yes, this is a house of willpower. Yeah, this is why it's Karka of Mars, right? It's signifying so many of the Martian Mars qualities. Like half of it is a Karka of Mercury, and then the other half of it is a Karka of Mars because it's like Mars and it's like Mercury, that communicative aspect of it. And the learning aspect of it is very much related to Mercury, and then the willpower, ambition, passion, drive, courage, strength, if I haven't said it already, being competitive. All of these things have to do with Mars. Again, this house represents sibling. Sibling has to do with Mercury. It's related. So they're very much like these two planets. It's like this house is being split between their qualities in terms of what kinds of things it supports and demands.
So
It's a house of willpower. So the person here will exert their will, and the sun is authority. So If someone has a sun here, for example, it's like your
Intense.
will
Yeah.
is the authority, like what I'm saying, because it's a house of also saying, because it's a house of communication, what I'm saying has authority. It is the truth, even though might not be, that's definitely the way they feel.
But I guess it still does well in this house, does it not?
Yeah, no, it's very good. Yeah. We want
Yeah.
we want Mars and Sun here, and we also want Saturn here, but Saturn will show its great capacity of doing well in this house over a long period of time, which is fine. This is a Upachaya house. No matter how you flip the coin, that's how it's gonna go. Use the example of a trumpet in one of the other videos. You start playing the trumpet, no one's good at it at the beginning. But over time, with time, an Upachaya house, the third house, you just become better because you keep practicing you have the willpower and the discipline to show up every day and to keep doing it and doing it over time. You may be a professional trumpet player. Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you ever have band in school?
Yeah, and they gave me the clarinet, and
Oh,
I couldn't make a damn. I found I hated that. What did you
okay.
get?
I had a flute.
Oh, a flute is nice.
No, but I'm not nice, right? So it's kind of weird for me. But I remember I was just thinking because
Nice.
when you brought up the trombone or whatever, the trumpet, I was like, it's so annoying to listen to people practice that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you got the clarinet. Interesting.
It made me wanna feel like I wanted to drop out of school every week whenever I had to. Like, I don't
Oh
want to
my,
be
oh
here.
my God.
So we're gonna end the video here. We've covered the first house, second house, and third house. We're gonna come back to cover the next set of houses, and hopefully we'll cover more because we just took some time to explain what the sun is, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. We'll see you guys soon. Much love. Till next time. Thank you, Jay.